Here is the absurdity. A sentence can become more believable without gaining a single new fact. Nothing changes in the world. No witness appears. No document is discovered. The sentence simply comes back. And when it comes back enough times, it may stop sounding like a claim and start sounding like something everybody knows. That is the quiet engine inside propaganda. Not always a brilliant argument. Not always persuasion by evidence. Sometimes it is just repetition, wearing a groove into the mind. The easy explanation is that people are gullible. But that explanation is too flattering to the rest of us. Smart people fall for it. Educated people fall for it. People who hate being manipulated can still trust a slogan, an accusation, or a piece of common sense that has simply been made familiar. So what is the brain doing? It is trying to survive the day without investigating every sound, headline, and warning from scratch. The brain is fast because it uses shortcuts. One of them is useful almost every hour of your life and dangerous when someone learns how to aim it. Things that are easier to process often feel safer, smoother, and more believable. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect. In a 1977 study by Lynn Hasher, David Goldstein, and Thomas Tapino, people judged trivia-like statements for truth. Later, they saw some of the same statements again, mixed with new ones. The repeated statements were rated as more believable. Repetition had added no evidence, but it had added ease. That ease matters. When you hear a claim for the second time, the words move faster. The sentence feels less rough. Your brain does not usually say, "I believe this because I heard it before." It says something more dangerous. "This feels right, and I am not sure why." That "not sure why" is where propaganda moves in. Before we go deeper, thank you for watching. If this scratches that strange itch, a like helps more people find systems that look ridiculous until the hidden logic appears. Subscribe for more everyday absurdities, and tell us what should go under the microscope next, because the best part is still ahead. The effect is not trapped in old psychology labs. Researchers have found it with false news headlines too. Prior exposure can make fake headlines seem more accurate later, even when they were marked as disputed by fact-checkers. It also appeared with politically unfriendly headlines, as long as the claim was not so impossible that it collapsed on sight. That last detail is important. Repetition is not magic. It does not make everyone believe anything. If a claim slams into something you know with total force, you may reject it immediately. But the uncomfortable finding is that knowledge is not armor. In later experiments, people sometimes gave higher truth ratings to repeated false statements, even when they knew the correct answer. The truth was in memory, but the familiar lie was easier to reach. So propaganda does not need to erase your mind. It only needs to create a tiny moment where familiarity beats checking. There is a famous line often pinned on Vladimir Lenin or Joseph Goebbels. "A lie told often enough becomes the truth." The irony is almost perfect, because quotation researchers have not found solid evidence that either man said that exact sentence. The quote itself behaves like the thing it describes. It has been repeated with confident attribution for so long that the attribution feels true. But the mechanism behind the line is real. Propagandists have long understood that belief is not only about facts, it is also about emotion, identity, social pressure, and control over what people hear. Nazi propaganda did not depend on one message delivered once. It used newspapers, radio, film, books, theater, music, schools, posters, youth groups, rallies, and slogans until a worldview could feel like the air around people. And that reveals the twist. Propaganda works not because humans are unusually stupid, but because our brains are usually efficient. Most of the time, familiarity is a decent clue. If you keep hearing that a bridge is closed, a storm is coming, or a food is poisonous, it may be safer to take the warning seriously than to launch a private investigation. A brain that doubted every repeated warning would waste energy and miss danger. The absurdity is that this same helpful machinery can be hacked. Repeat a useful warning, and people learn. Repeat a false accusation, and it can begin to feel like common knowledge. Repeat a slogan, and it can become a moral reflex. Repeat an enemy image, and people may stop seeing the enemy as fully human. The first time you hear an extreme claim, it may sound shocking. The 10th time, it may sound familiar. The 100th time, the question may quietly change. Not, is this outrageous? But why are so many people talking about it? That is one of propaganda's strangest moves. It does not always need you to fully believe. Sometimes it only needs to move the boundary of what seems discussable. That is also why correcting falsehoods is so delicate. If a correction repeats the false claim over and over, it can accidentally polish the lie. The safer pattern is often to lead with the truth, mention the falsehood briefly, explain why it misleads, and return to the truth again. Because the brain remembers the path it walks most often. So why does propaganda work? Because truth is not the only signal our minds measure. We also measure ease. We measure repetition. We notice whether other people seem to recognize the idea. We notice whether a claim fits a story we already want to believe. Propaganda succeeds when it turns a message into an environment. Not one lie, but a weather system of repeated cues. And that is the bigger lesson. Many absurd systems survive because they exploit shortcuts that are not broken. Familiarity helps us learn language, recognize faces, trust routines, and move through the world without analyzing every second from scratch. The danger begins when someone else controls the repetitions. The defense is not to distrust everything. That only creates a different vulnerability. The defense is to notice the warm feeling of familiarity and ask one more question. Do I believe this because I have evidence, or because I have heard it 100 times? Because sometimes the thing that sounds obvious is not obvious at all. It is just familiar.